Welcome to the Hidden Truths. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and hit the bell so you never miss a secret. Part 1: The Fall. They told him the hearing would be brief, that the paperwork had already been drawn up, that the plea would be accepted without delay, and that afterward, he could disappear quietly into the system, serve his sentence, and maybe come out the other side without too much of a scar. But they didn't understand that Matthew Cole had never been the kind of man to let things go that easily. Still, in the spring of 1969, when the courtroom ceiling fan turned overhead like a slow-bladed reminder that time was moving with or without him, he stood before the judge and said the words his friend had been too afraid to speak. "I did it!" And just like that, the gavel came down, and so did everything else. There had been a night, a warm, stupid, roaring night in April, where whiskey had blurred into laughter, where backroom campaign games and frat boy secrets still hung in the air like cigar smoke, and there had been a girl named Angie who hadn't asked for any of it, whose name didn't make it into the papers because she was smart enough to vanish before the headlines caught up, but the whispers were there, and Matthew, who had been watching over his friend like a damned shepherd for years, was the one who picked up the pieces when things went sideways, when the party stopped being fun, when politics turned predatory and privilege began to rot in the open. His friend, of course, had always been the chosen one, born into money, shaped by Ivy League boys with hands made for shaking and stabbing all at once, and that friend had plans his father had paid for, plans his mother had stitched into his spine since the day he learned how to shake a hand and lie through his teeth at the same time. Henry Ashcroft, golden boy, crowd pleaser, the kind of man who could sell you your own damn conscience and make you thank him afterward, had always known how to get away with things, but in April of '69, he was too sloppy, too drunk, too close to the edge, and when the girl ran crying from the room, when the aide panicked and called the police, it was Matthew who stepped forward, who said he'd invited her, that she hadn't said no, that he'd been the one who'd locked the door, even though he'd never even touched her, never been in the room, never so much as looked at her without shame for the way Henry had. But that was what friendship was, or what he'd been raised to believe: loyalty above law, silence above truth. And when the papers came out the next morning, it was Matthew's name they printed, Matthew's photo they ran in grainy black and white above a caption that made him out to be a man he didn't recognize. He never said otherwise. Never called the girl. Never wrote down what really happened. He let the lie grow until it was large enough to become history. The prison they sent him to wasn't one of those glamorous white-collar retreats where embezzlers go to read paperbacks and hit tennis balls. It was the kind with rats in the corners and guards who called him pretty boy, and bet how long it'd take for someone to break him. It didn't take long. His second week inside, he got a toothbrush handle to the ribs and a lifetime's worth of silence beaten into his lungs, and when he got out, 5 years later, early for good behavior, there were no parades, no apologies, no speeches from Henry Ashcroft waiting at the gates. Just a suitcase, a letter from his sister, and the bitter taste of a name that no longer opened doors. He moved to Ohio first, then to Arizona. Took jobs under fake names. Drank too much. Loved some women badly and others not at all. He watched Henry climb the ladder, state senate, then the House, then the Senate again. Always clean, always golden, always with the same campaign smile and the same rehearsed humility. Matthew watched it all from bar stools and bus stations, his past echoing in the laughter of politicians who never met a truth they couldn't bury. And then one day, 47 years after he'd said, "I did it," and meant, "I didn't but he did," Matthew turned on the television in a motel outside Yuma and saw the headline stretched across the screen. Henry Ashcroft announces presidential bid. America needs a new kind of honesty. The camera zoomed in on Henry's face, older now, his once boyish jawline weathered by the sun of 1,000 campaign trails, and Matthew felt something he hadn't felt in years. Not rage. Not betrayal. Just heat. Rising, slow and sure, from somewhere deep in the belly of a man who had kept a secret too long, and now saw the liar he protected on a stage built from that very lie. The anchor spoke in that flat, polished voice. Ashcroft says his campaign will focus on integrity, transparency, and restoring faith in the system. Matthew laughed, low and bitter. The kind of laugh that ends in silence. The kind that begins something else. Something he hadn't allowed himself in decades. The thought, the whisper, the truth, maybe it's time. Maybe it's time the country knew what he had done. Or hadn't done. Maybe it was time to ask what a man's silence was really worth. He turned off the TV, poured himself a drink, and stared at the glass. In the morning, he would drive. Not toward forgiveness, but toward reckoning. Part 2. The Lie That Held. Matthew drove into Washington under a bruised sky, the kind of dust that turns everything copper and quiet, and he thought, as the buildings came into view, how strange it was that a place could look both younger and older than you remembered it, like someone had repainted the front of a house but left the cracks in the foundation untouched. The monuments still gleamed, the avenues still spilled into circles like clock hands, and the Capitol still sat atop its hill like a lie polished daily. But the corners where he used to smoke with the boys from law school, the diner where they planned Henry's first campaign, the alley behind the old club where someone had once whispered, "We'll take care of it," those had all changed or disappeared or been paved over by progress that had no memory. He found a room in a cheap motel in Foggy Bottom, the kind where the air conditioner rattled like a loose tooth and the walls were painted a beige so non-committal it almost hurt to look at. He sat on the edge of the bed, staring at his boots, and wondered if anyone in this town would even remember his face. Probably not. That was the thing about being forgotten, you got used to it. But his name, that was another story. It wasn't about being remembered as a man. It was about being remembered as a story. The one they buried in '69 and built a career on. The first person he visited wasn't a journalist or a politician. It was Ellie Monroe. She was the only one left who'd know the truth and still be willing to speak it out loud. Ellie had been Henry's assistant back then, sharp as a razor, mean as a viper if she liked you, crueler if she didn't, and she'd known more than anyone should have. Matthew hadn't spoken to her in over 40 years, but he'd heard she was still in the city, working as an archivist for some progressive think tank, cataloging the sins of administrations past. He found her office in a red brick building near DuPont Circle, walked in with the slow confidence of a man who had nothing left to lose, and waited while the young receptionist with ironic glasses told her a Matthew Cole was in the lobby. She came out 5 minutes later, her hair white now, cut short, face lined but sharp, her mouth already halfway open with disbelief. "Jesus Christ," she said, her voice half a laugh, half a gasp. "I thought you were dead." "Close enough," he replied. She didn't hug him, didn't even reach out her hand. Just stared like she was counting all the years between them. "What are you doing here?" "Ashcroft's running," he said. "I saw," she replied. "So you're here to kill him?" "Not yet." She gestured him into her office, closed the door behind them, and sat like someone ready for a storm. "Tell me you're not going to the press." "Not yet." "Then why?" He stared at the wall behind her desk, where a framed photo of her and Henry from the '80s still hung. "Because he's building a presidency on my silence. And I'm not sure I can carry it anymore." She sighed, leaned back, crossed her arms. "Do you want revenge?" "No, then what?" "Truth. Truth doesn't sell. Not without scandal." "Then maybe I'll give them both." She looked at him for a long time. "You know if you go public, he'll bury you again. He's got people. Lawyers. Teams. Dirt. He already buried me once. I know how it feels. Doesn't scare me anymore. You think people will care? I don't know. But I care." She stood, walked to the window, stared down at the street. "You want help?" "I want your memory." "You want a statement?" "Not yet. I just want to know if you remember what happened that night." She turned. "Of course I remember. I remember the girl's name. I remember the phone call. I remember you showing up like a damn knight and him walking away clean. Did he ever tell you to lie?" "He didn't have to." "Would you lie for him again?" She shook her head. "Not anymore." They sat in silence for a moment. "I kept it all," she said. "Memos. Notes. Drafts of the press release. Copies of your plea. Why? Because I knew someday he'd forget what it cost to build his empire. And I wanted to remember. Can I see them? She nodded. They're not digital. Paper only. I don't trust clouds. She handed him a key. Storage unit. Georgetown. Unit 106. You're giving me everything? I'm giving you the past. What you do with it is yours. That night, he sat in his motel room, documents spread across the bed, the same words he'd signed decades ago now bleeding under the weak light like wounds reopening. He read the memo that changed his life. Assistant to Senator Ashcroft has agreed to take responsibility for the incident. No further comment. Position, legal intern. Status, terminated. One line. That's all he got. The rest of the page detailed the party, the donors, the optics, the timing. There was no mention of the girl. No mention of Henry. Just incident. Like truth had been reduced to a glitch in the system. He read the release drafts, the internal memos, the unofficial versions. He found a note in Ellie's handwriting. If this ever comes back, don't let them make you a ghost again. He stared at that line for a long time. Then he picked up the phone. He didn't call a reporter. He called someone else. Her. Angie. The girl. If she was even still alive. Part 3. The girl who disappeared. It took him 3 days to find her, and even then, it wasn't certainty that led him to her door but instinct, the quiet, persistent kind that hums behind your ribs when something unfinished calls you home. Her name wasn't Angie anymore. That had been buried, too. According to public records, there was no Angela Morgan born in Virginia in 1951 who'd ever pressed charges or filed a statement, and that wasn't a surprise. The whole reason she'd survived was because she vanished before the system could chew her up. But Matthew had one advantage. He remembered the way her voice shook when she said, "Don't let them say I wanted it." And he remembered the one time she told Henry where she was from. A nothing little town in Maryland with a name so forgettable he almost missed it when it popped up in the old letters Ellie had given him. A return address, no street number, just Box 14, Cumberland. That was enough. He rented a car and drove the length of the Potomac, the road folding and unfolding under him like old paper, and when he reached the town, he stopped at the post office first, a squat red brick building that smelled like dust and envelopes, and he asked, as plainly as he could, if anyone still picked up mail from Box 14. The man behind the counter narrowed his eyes, gave him a look like he was about to reach for the phone and call someone who might know what to do with strangers, and then said, "You a friend of hers?" Matthew nodded. "Sort of." The man paused, chewed his lip, then jerked his head toward the back of the room. "She picks up Wednesdays. Early. You just missed her. Does she still live nearby?" The man frowned. "She does. But she don't like visitors." "I'm not a visitor," Matthew said. "I'm a loose end." That must have meant something, or maybe the man was just tired of fighting ghosts, because he wrote down an address on the back of a receipt and slid it across the counter. "If she throws you off the porch, don't say I didn't warn you." It was a house at the edge of town, tucked behind a wall of overgrown hedges and a rusted iron gate. The driveway was gravel, barely held together, and the house itself was small, 2 stories with peeling white paint and wind chimes made from old silverware hanging from the porch. A dog barked when he stepped out of the car. No other sound followed. He stood at the gate for a full minute before opening it, the creak loud and sharp like something from a memory, and walked slowly up to the front steps. He knocked once. Then again. Nothing. He was about to leave when the door opened just a crack, the chain still drawn tight, and a single brown eye peeked out. "Yes? Angie?" She didn't respond. "It's Matthew Cole." Another pause. "From D.C." The door closed. He waited. The wind blew through the chimes. 5 seconds. 10. Then the chain slid back, and the door opened. She stood there in a sweater and jeans, hair streaked with gray, a line between her eyebrows that hadn't been there when she was 19. She looked at him the way someone looks at a letter addressed in a familiar hand but delivered decades late. Jesus, she whispered. You're still alive. So are you. She opened the door wider. Come in. The house was clean but cluttered, full of books and folded quilts and half-drunk mugs of tea. There was a cat on the windowsill and framed photographs that didn't show anyone he recognized. She led him to the kitchen and poured him coffee without asking, her hands steady, her movements slow. When they sat, it was as if the air thickened with everything neither of them had ever said. You know why I'm here, he said. Of course I do. He's running. I know. Did you see the announcement? Everyone did. Did you think about saying something? Every day. Every year. And then I remembered what it felt like to be told I didn't matter. She took a sip of coffee. They said I'd ruin his future. That he was special. That he was going to change the world. And all I'd ever be was a problem. They told me I'd be out in 3 years. They told me I should be grateful I wasn't in the paper. Do you regret not going public? I regret thinking it would have made a difference. He sat back. It might now. She looked at him. You think America cares what 2 old ghosts have to say? I don't know. But I care. I care that he's standing on stages talking about truth and justice when he's never earned a second of it. And what do you want from me? Your voice. Your name. Your memory. She went quiet. Looked out the window. The chimes danced. I changed my name because I had to. Because when I tried to start over, every job interview turned into a whisper. Every neighbor turned into a question. I didn't vanish because I was afraid. I vanished because it was the only way to be seen as anything other than a victim. You're not, he said. I know. But that's the only story they let me have. She stood. Walked to a cabinet. Pulled out a manila envelope. Handed it to him. It's everything I wrote that week. Letters. Journal entries. Names. What I remember. What they said. What I wanted to scream in court. Why didn't you? Because the only one willing to pay was you. I'm not paying anymore. She looked at him, something hot behind her eyes. Neither am I. He stood. Will you let me use this? If you promise me one thing. Anything. Don't let him rewrite it again. He nodded. I won't. She followed him to the door. The dog barked again. You'll need a lawyer, she said. And a bulletproof vest. You think it'll get that bad? I think powerful men don't like being reminded they're not gods. You ever think about what could have been? She smiled, sad and soft. Only when I forget what was. He stepped off the porch. She called out, Matthew. He turned. Good luck. You too. He drove back to the city with the envelope on the passenger seat like a sacred text. This was the last piece. The missing voice. The proof. The truth. Not polished. Not press ready. But real. And maybe, just maybe, that would be enough. Part 4. The Ghost File. Matthew didn't trust many people anymore, but he trusted grief, trusted silence, and trusted what a journalist looked like when they were young enough to want blood but old enough to know they'd have to live with the stains, and that's why he chose Daniel Keene. Daniel had been in the business for 30 years, once the golden boy of the Capitol Hill press pool, now a man with a weathered press badge and a byline that had floated to the second page more often than the front, but there had been a time, back in the early 90s, when Daniel's exposé on the defense procurement scandal had taken down 4 contractors and a senator, and Matthew remembered that because Henry had called it poison in print, and any man who scared Henry was worth finding. Daniel worked now out of a small office over a bakery in Adams Morgan, the kind of place where the ceiling tiles sagged and the coffee machine had to be kicked twice before it did its job. Matthew waited until nearly 7 to show up, knowing Daniel stayed late, knowing that whatever wasn't filed by then probably wouldn't be, and when he knocked, the door creaked open and Daniel looked up from behind a mountain of manila folders and empty Red Bull cans, blinked twice, and said, You look like a man with a long story and bad timing. Matthew stepped in and closed the door. I have both. Name? Matthew Cole. Daniel frowned, then sat up straighter. I know that name. Most people don't. You were in Ashcroft's first campaign. I was the reason it didn't end in '69. Daniel stared at him for a long beat, then motioned to the chair across from him. Tell me everything. Matthew pulled the envelope from his coat. It was thicker now. Ellie's papers, Angie's notes, the old memos, the court statements, the photos, even the newspaper clippings no one had looked at in decades. He set it down on the table like a bomb and leaned back. This is the truth. Not the sanitized version. The version he built everything on. Daniel didn't open it. Not yet. Why now? Because he's about to be president. And because I can't watch the country by a lie I helped write. You have proof? Enough to make people ask questions. Why me? Because you've burned bridges before. And because you know what it's like to be hated for getting it right. Daniel opened the envelope slowly, eyes scanning the first few pages. His breath caught once, then again. Jesus. Yeah. You realize this could kill his campaign. That's the idea. And maybe you. Matthew shrugged. I've been dead before. Daniel kept reading. When he got to Angie's letters, he set them down like they were hot. Does she know? She gave them to me herself. She willing to talk? No, then it's your word against a national hero. And a pile of documents. But no smoking gun. Sometimes smoke is enough. Daniel leaned back. If I run this, I lose everything I've rebuilt. And if you don't, the country loses what little truth it still believes in. You sound like a man who's rehearsed that line. I've been saying it in my head for 50 years. Daniel stood, paced the room once, twice, then sat again. I'll need to verify it. Cross-check the memos. Talk to Monroe? Pull court transcripts. Interview you. On record. Fine. You'll go public? If it gets us there. He'll deny it. Of course. He'll call you a drunk, a felon, a bitter has-been. He won't be wrong. But he'll be lying. Exactly. Daniel tapped his pen against the table. Give me 3 days. You have 2. You're not in a position to make demands. Neither are you. You want your name back on the front page? Daniel grinned. Touché. I'll be at the Chester Arms Motel. Room 205. Classy. It has a working sink. That's all I need. As Matthew stood, Daniel said, You really think this'll change anything? I think truth matters. Even if no one wants to hear it. You know what they say, the truth shall set you free. Only if you survive it. That night, Matthew didn't sleep. He walked the streets instead, letting the city wash over him in neon and noise. He passed restaurants full of laughter, bars spilling music into the dark, couples holding hands like nothing bad ever happened. He passed the old Capitol steps and stopped, stared up at the dome, remembered the time he and Henry had stood there at midnight, drunk on power and cheap scotch, shouting plans into the stars. He sat on the steps for an hour, watching the lights change, then walked back to the motel, the cold settling in his bones like something earned. In the morning, there was a knock. He opened the door. Daniel stood there, holding the envelope. I want to write it. You're sure? I want to write it myself. Not assign it. Not pass it to some intern. I want my name on the line. Then do it. But I need something more. What? A photo. Of you? From then. Something they can't ignore. Matthew nodded. He reached into his bag, pulled out the old one, him and Henry, side by side, arms around each other, young and grinning and too clean for what came next. This work? Daniel stared at it. Yeah. That'll work. As Daniel left, he said, When this hits, you won't be safe. I've never been safer. Why's that? Because this time, I'm the one writing the ending. Part 5, The First Leak. It started not with a bang, not with a press conference, or a front-page headline, but with a tweet, 19 words, posted at 7:14 a.m. by a low-tier political blogger with a reputation for spotting rot beneath polish. Sources say a buried scandal from 1969 may derail the Ashcroft campaign. Names. Documents. Coming soon. No one knew what it meant, not at first, but in a news cycle starved for blood and scandal, the words lit a fuse, and within minutes, other accounts were picking it up, speculating, threading old headlines with wild guesses, and by 9 a.m., Matthew Cole's name was trending beside Ashcroft's, two ghosts dragged into the light by a question that had gone unanswered for half a century. Matthew watched it unfold from the edge of a diner booth, coffee in one hand, his phone lighting up with pings and calls from numbers he didn't recognize. Across the table, Daniel was already on his second notepad, scribbling lines, dates, quotes, building the scaffolding of a story that was no longer his alone. "It's moving faster than I thought," he said. "It's already on Politico. And one of the old Senate staffers just told me he remembers the party. Remembers the panic. Does he remember the girl? No. But he remembers Ashcroft crying in a hallway, and Monroe trying to shut everyone up." Matthew stared at his screen. There was his face, young and grainy, from an archive photo somebody had dug up, the mugshot from his arrest. The caption read, "Matthew Cole, Ashcroft campaign aide, 1969. Took plea deal after unnamed incident involving female volunteer." No one said what the incident was? Not yet. But the words, sexual misconduct, and cover-up, were already swirling in bold, italicized guesses. Daniel looked up. "This is where it gets ugly." It already was. "You ready to go on record?" Matthew nodded. "Yeah. We do this now, the story's ours. No room for spin. You say it yourself. You say it clean. Then let's say it." They called a friend of Daniel's, someone at NPR with a reputation for holding the line between calm and fire. She met them at a studio on K Street, walked in with a face made for camera but a mind built for war, and said, "This is off the record until it's not. You pull back at any point, we stop. Understood?" "Understood," Matthew said. He sat under the lights, the mic in front of him like a noose or a megaphone, and told it all: the party, the girl, the deal, the silence, the prison, the years, the campaign that rose on his back. He didn't cry. He didn't dramatize. He told it like a man filing a report on a house that had burned down and taken his name with it. She asked smart questions. Pressed. Stepped back. By the end, even Daniel looked rattled. "We'll run it tomorrow," she said. "Early. Before the Sunday shows." But someone leaked the tape. By midnight, a 2-minute clip, Matthew's voice saying, "I went to prison for a crime I didn't commit because Henry Ashcroft had a future and I didn't," was bouncing across every corner of the internet. And then it wasn't a leak. It was a rupture. The next morning, the campaign responded. A senior advisor stood in front of a podium and said, "These are unfounded accusations from a discredited source. Mr. Cole is a convicted felon with a long history of instability. We will not be distracted." But it was too late. Journalists were already tearing through archives. Angie's letters, redacted and republished, were online. Ellie Monroe released a statement confirming the campaign's internal panic. And someone, no one knew who, leaked the original police report, which had never mentioned Matthew by name, only an unnamed male staffer, likely senior. That was enough. The girl's name remained sealed, protected. But the timeline was there. The silence was there. And so was the question: if Ashcroft didn't do it, why did Matthew take the fall? The campaign doubled down. Denied. Deflected. Called it a coordinated attack by enemies of truth. But Henry didn't appear in public that day. Or the next. And when he finally did, standing on a stage in Ohio, face pale, jaw clenched, he looked like a man holding a grenade with the pin already pulled. "I will not be bullied by the ghosts of the past," he said. "This country needs courage, not cowardice." Matthew watched the clip in his motel room, muted. Then he packed his bag, checked out, and moved to a hotel with better locks. Daniel called that night. They're digging into your record now. They've got reporters at your old job. Your landlord. Even your sister. Let them dig. You okay? I was broken before this started. I'm not gonna shatter now. But it was harder than he let on. The noise. The calls. The threats. Emails that said, "Kill yourself, liar." Messages that said, "We believed in him. You're just bitter." Even some that said, "Thank you." The last ones mattered most. He read those twice. Printed one out and stuck it in his pocket like armor. Then came the invitation. A message from a producer at 60 Minutes. They wanted the full story. Prime time. Matthew hesitated. Daniel pushed. If you want it to last, if you want it to matter, you go big. So he said yes. The interview was taped in a quiet studio. He wore a jacket that didn't quite fit and looked into a camera like it was a confession booth. He told the story again. This time for millions. When it aired, the country split. Some called him a hero. Others a traitor. But no one ignored him. The polls dropped. Not by much. But enough. And that's when Henry finally called. After 50 years. A blocked number. 2 rings. Matthew answered. "Matt," came the voice. Still smooth. Still rehearsed. "We need to talk." "Now you want to talk?" "I think it's time." "It was time in '69. Silence. Then, "Meet me. Tomorrow. Noon. Rock Creek Park." "You think it'll fix things?" "I think we owe it to each other." "You owe me more than that." "Then let me try." Matthew said nothing. Then, "I'll be there." He hung up. Sat back. And waited for the past to finish what it started. Part 6. The Meeting. Rock Creek Park was mostly empty when Matthew arrived, the path leading through the trees painted in morning light, everything quiet except for the soft scuffle of joggers and the occasional hum of traffic beyond the leaves, and he walked slowly, one hand in his coat pocket, the other holding the envelope again, the same one with Angie's letters and Ellie's memos, not because he meant to hand them over, but because it felt like he needed to carry the weight of them into this moment, into the meeting that had lived in his head for 5 decades. Henry was already there, standing beside a bench under a low-hanging tree, his posture stiff, suit too perfect for the setting, a man used to cameras trying to remember how to be alone. He turned when he heard the steps, his eyes narrowing not with anger, but calculation, like he was still assessing how much damage this man across from him could do. "You came," Henry said. "You asked?" Matthew replied. He didn't sit. Neither did Henry. "You look older," Henry said. "We both are. I wasn't sure you'd actually show. I wasn't sure you'd actually call." Henry nodded, glanced at the envelope. "You brought it. Not for you. You still think this is justice?" "No," Matthew said. "This is survival. Finally on my terms." Henry sighed, rubbed a hand down his face. "You realize what you've done? You've given them something to weaponize. Against me. Against everything I've built." "You mean everything I helped you build?" "You destroyed it." "I didn't destroy it, Henry. You built it on rot. I just stopped holding it up." Silence. Wind in the branches. A bird flitting across the grass. "You ever think about that night?" Matthew asked. Henry didn't answer. "You ever think about her?" "I try not to." "I do. Every day. And not because of guilt, though I have that too, but because she never asked for any of it. Not the party. Not the silence. Not the scars." Henry finally looked him in the eye. "I was scared. You were privileged. I didn't know what else to do. You let me do it for you. You offered. Because I thought you were worth it. I was a kid. So was I. And I lost everything. You lost time. I lost life." Henry's mouth tightened. "So what now? You want an apology?" "I want truth. From your mouth. Not mine. You already told the world your version. And they listened. Now they want yours. Mine won't be enough. Then say it anyway. Why? Because I'm not doing this for revenge. I'm doing it so no one else lets silence make them a martyr. Henry looked away. A woman jogged past, earbuds in, oblivious. When she was gone, he said, "It wasn't supposed to happen like that." But it did. I panicked. I froze. You raped her, Henry. He flinched. I didn't. You didn't stop. That's the same thing. He sat, finally, on the bench, head in his hands. I've thought about confessing 100 times. Then why didn't you? Because I didn't want to die with nothing left. You've lived your whole life with more than you earned. And now I have less than I can carry. Matthew sat beside him. Not close. But enough. Tell them, he said. On camera. On the record. It'll ruin me. It'll set others free. She won't come forward. She already did. Through me. Through her words. Henry stared ahead. You hate me? I loved you. Once. Like a brother. And then you became a man who used me like a shield. If I do this, the campaign dies. Then let it die. He was quiet for a long time. Then, if I say it all. That's the only way it counts. And if I don't? Then I keep speaking. Henry nodded. You'll always be better than me. No. Just finally unafraid of you. They stood. He didn't shake hands. Henry didn't offer. You have 3 days, Matthew said. Then I go live. He walked away, leaving Henry on the bench, alone, the trees closing around him like a courtroom with no doors. Part 7, the broadcast. The statement was scheduled for 8 p.m. Eastern, the kind of time slot reserved for war declarations, presidential debates, and moments that split history into before and after, and as the hour drew close, televisions across the country flickered to life, networks clearing airwaves to carry the words that no one had expected, not even those who had followed the leak from the beginning. Not even the old men in suits who had banked their futures on Henry Ashcroft's inevitable rise, not even the aides who had slept 3 hours a night for months believing the engine of power could outrun the weight of the past. The press room had been cleared, the backdrop stripped of campaign slogans, just a seal, a flag, a podium, plain, official, final. Matthew sat in a hotel room on the 8th floor of the Whitmore downtown, his back against the headboard, the remote in his hand, the air in the room thin. The envelope, that same damn envelope, sat on the desk in the corner, unopened now, its contents all out in the world, circulating like oxygen, and for the first time in 50 years, he felt less like a man holding a secret and more like a man waiting for someone else to hold it with him. The screen cut to the podium. Henry walked out alone. No notes. No handlers. No smile. Just a man who looked like he hadn't slept in 3 days, wearing a suit that didn't fit the way it used to. He adjusted the mic, looked up, looked straight into the camera, and said, "There are things I have never told you." The silence that followed wasn't silence at all. It was the holding of a nation's breath. In April of 1969, while working as an aide on my father's Senate campaign, I was involved in an incident that I have allowed to be buried, allowed to be misrepresented, and most unforgivably, allowed another man to carry the blame for. Matthew didn't blink. He barely breathed. Matthew Cole went to prison for something I did. Because I asked him to. Because I was afraid. Because I believed that I mattered more than he did. Across the country, phones dropped. Pens froze. Staffers looked at each other in mute horror. And still he spoke. There was a girl. Her name will remain private. She was hurt. Not only by my actions, but by my silence. I have spent decades building a life on top of the rubble I left behind. And I am ashamed. Matthew leaned forward, the remote slipping from his hand. I do not expect forgiveness. I do not ask for understanding. I am not here to salvage a campaign. I am here to finally tell the truth. Reporters began to tweet before the statement was even over. Breaking. Ashcroft confesses. #Ashcroft 2024 trending. Live now. Presidential candidate admits 1969 cover-up. And still he spoke. I have always said this country needs honesty. I believe that still. Even if it means stepping away. Even if it means never earning back the trust one lost before I ever had the courage to try. He looked down. Looked back up. I will be suspending my campaign. Effective immediately. Gasps in the press room. Screams in campaign headquarters. Absolute stillness in Matthew's chest. I do not deserve the office I sought. But I owe the truth to the people I hurt. And to the man I betrayed. The broadcast ended. Cut to static. Cut to anchors scrambling to frame what no one had seen coming. Matthew turned off the television. The room was dark now, lit only by a street lamp cutting through the blinds. He stood. Walked to the window. Looked out at the city that had once broken him and now felt, for the first time, quiet. His phone rang. Not Daniel. Not Angie. Not Ellie. Henry. He answered. Said nothing. You watched? Yeah. Did I get it right? You got it honest. That's all I had left. It was enough. Silence. Then, thank you? Don't thank me. Just live like it meant something. I'm going to disappear for a while. Good. You ever need anything, I'll call someone else. Henry laughed. Quiet. Then hung up. Matthew set the phone down. Walked to the desk. Picked up the envelope. Tore it in half. Then again. Then again. Let the pieces fall like snow. He opened the window. Let the wind take them. In the morning, he would walk to a park bench. He would sit. He would breathe. And he would not be afraid. Part 8. The Fallout. They called him a whistleblower, a truth-teller, a man of courage, an American hero, and by the end of the first week, Matthew Cole had been offered 3 book deals, 4 podcast interviews, a lecture circuit contract worth 6 figures, and a feature in The Atlantic titled, The Man Who Broke a President. None of which he responded to, none of which he wanted, because what none of them understood, not the anchors, not the journalists, not even Daniel, was that he hadn't done it for applause. He hadn't done it for the story, he hadn't done it to finally speak, he had done it because the weight of staying quiet had grown so heavy it was crushing his lungs. The morning after the broadcast, his face was everywhere, on magazine covers, on television segments, on Twitter threads turned into essay collections overnight, and everywhere people speculated on what he meant, on what he represented, as if he were some symbol they could shape into whatever made their politics feel righteous. The left called him brave, the right called him a liar, and the center wondered aloud on radio panels whether it mattered anymore, whether people really needed the sins of the past dragged into the future. But none of them had watched a man confess to the entire nation while standing under lights bright enough to bleach bone. Only Matthew had seen Henry's hands shake. Only Matthew had heard that tremble in his voice that no camera caught. And while the rest of the world debated the meaning of accountability, Matthew walked through streets where strangers recognized him with soft nods and awkward stares, as if they weren't sure whether to congratulate him or thank him or cross to the other side. Daniel stayed close that first week, handling calls, screening messages, deleting the worst of the threats. They're going to try and use you, he said. That's what they do. They break people and then break them again through celebration. I'm not interested in being a martyr, Matthew said. Or a messiah. But the publishers didn't care. They wanted his story. They wanted the prison years, the courtroom silence, the handwritten letters he never sent. They wanted a voice, carefully edited, that made audiences cry. Angie called once. Just once. You okay? She asked. I don't know, he said. Are you? I've been better. You saw it? All of it. Did it help? It helped to know I wasn't crazy. You never were. Then why did I spend 50 years feeling like I was? He had no answer. She said goodbye without saying it, hung up, and never called again. Ellie Monroe sent a letter. A real one. Paper, envelope, stamp. Inside was just one line, written in her familiar hand. You kept your promise. He folded it, carried it in his wallet. But nothing prepared him for the day the president called. Not Henry, the real president, the sitting one, still in office, still running the show. The call came through Daniel's phone, an aide first, then the man himself. "We'd like to honor you," he said. "In what way?" Matthew asked. "Medal of Freedom. For your integrity." Matthew laughed. Loud. Once. Then said, "You want to give me a medal for staying silent until it nearly killed me? For telling the truth? Then give it to Angie. She doesn't want it. Neither do I. Are you sure? I'm not a hero. I'm just the end of a lie." The story didn't die, not for a long time. It mutated. Turned into a screenplay. A docuseries. A political analysis case study. His name was cited in college lectures, in op-eds, in campaign slogans for new candidates who barely knew the decade it came from. But Matthew stayed quiet. Turned down every offer. Moved out of the city. Found a place upstate, quiet, wooded, where the nights didn't hum with memory. Daniel visited once, stood on the porch with a bottle of bourbon and said, "You know you changed the game." "I didn't want to," Matthew replied. "But you did. Then someone else can clean up the board." They drank in silence. By spring, the story faded. As stories do. Henry vanished. Rumors said he was living in the Rockies, growing a beard, meditating in silence, writing a memoir that no publisher dared touch. And Matthew? He walked. Every day. Through trees. Along rivers. He kept a journal. Not for publication. Just for breath. One day, he saw a boy fishing in the creek, alone, and the boy looked up, grinned, said, "Hey mister, you ever catch anything out here?" Matthew smiled. "Not lately." The boy shrugged. "Still nice to try." And Matthew realized that's all he'd ever done. Try. Fail. Hurt. Hope. Speak. Live. When he got home that night, he sat at his desk, pulled out a sheet of paper, and wrote the words, "I am still here." Folded it. Left it on the table. Then went to bed. Slept. Dreamed. And didn't wake up gasping. Part 9. The Man Behind the Lie. The letter came in the mail, not an email, not a call, but a crisp envelope with his name typed clean in the center, no return address, just the words, "For consideration," on the back, and when Matthew opened it, he found a 2-page proposal from a documentary team based in New York, people who had made their names on intimate profiles of people on the other side of history, whistleblowers, survivors. One-time villains made human again under the soft lens of a new generation's curiosity, and they wanted to tell his story, not just the scandal, not just the politics, but the whole thing, who he was before the fall, who he was before the silence, who he was when the world still thought Henry Ashcroft was a good man and Matthew Cole was just a shadow in the room. He let the letter sit on the kitchen table for 3 days, weighed down by a coffee mug, untouched, unread beyond the first paragraph, because part of him didn't want to go back, not that far, not to the kid who wore button-down shirts and dreamed of changing the world with policy and belief, who laughed too easily and drank too hard and worshipped Henry like a brother he never had. The version of himself who thought loyalty was a virtue and not a shackle. But on the 4th morning, he called the number. The voice on the other end was young, excited, too eager by half, but respectful. "We don't want to exploit you, Mr. Cole. We want to understand you." And maybe that was enough, because 2 weeks later they came, a 3-person crew with good microphones and better questions, and they set up in the living room of the small cabin he bought after the world finally let him go. The interview began like most did, with childhood. "Where were you born?" "Richmond, Virginia." "What were your parents like?" "Tired. Kind. My father worked at the post office. My mother taught 2nd grade." "What did you want to be?" "When I was 5, a train conductor. When I was 15, a senator." "When did you meet Henry Ashcroft?" "Freshman year at UVA. He was loud. Confident. Funny. I didn't like him at first. Then he said something about wanting to change the world, and I believed him. Why did you follow him? Because I thought he was going somewhere I wanted to go. What did you see in him? Vision. Charisma. Fire. The kind of man who made you believe you were part of something bigger. And what did he see in you? Matthew paused. A shield. A mirror. Someone who could clean up what he didn't want to own. The cameras rolled. The questions kept coming. They asked about the night. He told them again. They asked about prison. He answered. But then they asked what no one had before. What did you lose that people don't know about? And that was when something in him cracked open. He spoke not of politics, not of punishment, but of little things, of the girl he was supposed to marry before the scandal broke, of the letter he wrote her from prison that she never answered, of the birthday he spent in solitary after a fight he didn't start, of the dream he had every night for 3 years where he stood in a courtroom and told the truth but no one listened. He told them about the job he almost got after prison, how the HR manager recognized his name, and suddenly the position had been filled. He told them about the diner where he was a dishwasher for 5 years, where no one asked questions, where the cook gave him a sandwich at the end of every shift, and how that felt like grace. He told them about the night he tried to overdose, and the morning he woke up ashamed and angry to still be alive. He told them about the time he saw Henry on TV, smiling, making a joke about hard lessons and clean slates, and how he punched a mirror so hard his knuckles bled for days. And he told them, finally, about the moment he realized silence wasn't noble, it was cowardice dressed up in patience, and that if he didn't speak, he would die having never said his own name aloud. When the crew left, they thanked him, hugged him, promised the edit would be kind. We don't want to turn you into something you're not, they said. Good, Matthew replied. I've had enough of that. The documentary aired 6 weeks later. It didn't go viral. It didn't make national headlines. But it mattered. People watched it in classrooms, in recovery centers, in quiet living rooms late at night. They wrote letters. Sent emails. One came from a man in Nebraska who had been accused of something he didn't do and spent 20 years behind bars. I didn't think anyone would understand what it's like, he wrote. But now I know I'm not alone. Another came from a woman who had kept her silence for 40 years after a professor cornered her in his office. You reminded me that silence doesn't protect us, she wrote. It just isolates us. Matthew read every one. He didn't reply. He didn't have to. The stories came not to be answered, but to be held. And he held them. Quietly. Gently. Like they were sacred. One afternoon, Daniel called. You see the new poll? No, public trust in whistleblowers is at an all-time high. That doesn't mean much. It does to the people who still have something to say. Then maybe it means everything. They sat in silence for a moment. Then Daniel asked, You regret anything? Only that I waited so long to stop being someone else. He spent the rest of the week hiking, riding, listening to the wind move through trees. And when he passed a pond on the edge of the woods, he skipped a rock across its surface and thought not about the man he used to be, but the one he was becoming. Not perfect. Not whole. But finally, undeniably, his own. Part 10. The Campaign Trail. Matthew had thought, foolishly maybe, that once Henry was gone from the race, once the final admission had landed like a stone in the river and the ripples had stretched and faded, that the story would be over, the curtain would fall, and he could slip back into the kind of quiet that doesn't come from hiding but from release. But the thing about scandal is it never really ends, it just changes hands. Gets picked up and carried by those who smell power in broken things, and it wasn't long before Henry's name resurfaced, not in the polling numbers or the party meetings, but in the mouths of those who wanted to wear his redemption like a badge and turn his shame into a banner for their own ascent. The first call came from a state senator in Pennsylvania, young, hungry, someone who'd cut his teeth on minor cable news slots and tweets sharp enough to draw blood, and he said, I believe in what you did. I believe in truth. I want to run a campaign that honors that. I'd like your endorsement. Matthew hung up before the sentence ended. But they kept coming. Emails. Voicemails. Letters. Journalists wanting op-eds. Colleges offering speaking gigs. Campaigns looking for a new face of integrity. Matthew ignored them all. Until the knock on the door. It was late April, just before dusk, the kind of evening where the light turns gold and the sky feels like an old photograph, and standing on his porch was a woman in a navy coat, her eyes direct, her hands empty. "Mr. Cole," she said. "My name is Elena Ward. I'm running for Congress in Maryland's 3rd District." He didn't respond. She continued, "I'm not here to ask for money. Or even an endorsement. I'm here because your story gave me the courage to run. I was 14 when I first heard your name. My mother watched the confession live," she cried. "I didn't understand why at the time. Now I do." Still, he didn't speak. She reached into her coat, pulled out a card. "I just wanted to say thank you. And if you ever feel like helping someone who actually believes in earning the truth, I'd be honored to buy you a cup of coffee." Then she left. No pitch. No promise. Just words. And that was enough to make him think. 3 days later, he called Daniel. "You know her? Ward?" "Yeah. She's legit. Sharp. Clean. Maybe too clean for the game, but God knows we need more like her." She asked for a meeting. "You going to take it?" "I don't know." "What are you afraid of?" "Becoming the story again." "You were never the story. You were the warning. Maybe it's time you became the lesson." So he met with her. They sat at a cafe in Baltimore, unannounced, unphotographed, and she told him about her platform: education reform, criminal justice overhaul, campaign finance transparency, and none of it sounded radical, but all of it sounded sincere, and sincerity had become the rarest currency in politics. She didn't ask him for anything. Just listened. Asked him what he thought people needed most. He said, "A reason to believe the system isn't wired to break them." She nodded. "And do you believe it?" He looked at her. "I'm still trying." Over the next month, he spoke at one event. Just one. Quiet. Local. A community hall with maybe 100 folding chairs, 24 filled. He told his story again. Not with drama. Not with anger. Just facts. Silence. Breath. Regret. People clapped. Some stood. A woman hugged him and whispered, "My brother went to prison for something he didn't do. You make me feel less crazy." He went home that night and cried. Quietly. No headlines. No tweets. Just tears. When Elena won the primary, she called him. Thanked him. Said he didn't owe her anything, but that if he ever wanted to sit down and write something, about justice, about silence, about what it costs to carry someone else's future, she'd be honored to share it. He thought about it. Started to write. Stopped. Started again. Not for her. Not even for the public. For himself. A year passed. The story faded. Elena won her seat. Henry stayed gone. Angie never called again. Ellie passed away. A small obituary in the Washington Post. Matthew went to the funeral. Stood in the back. Said nothing. Dropped a rose on her casket and whispered, "Thank you?" And still, the truth didn't vanish. It settled. It hardened into something stable. Something he could live inside without choking. He still got letters. Not as many. But some. One came from a law student who said, "I want to be the kind of lawyer who stops this from happening again." Another from a man in hospice who wrote, "I spent my life lying. You made me wish I hadn't." Matthew never answered. But he kept them all. In a shoebox. On a shelf. And every so often, when the wind outside the cabin got loud and the world felt like it might tip over, he opened the box and read one. Just one. And reminded himself that truth doesn't need to be loud. Just real. Part 11, The Silence After. The days passed like river stones, smoothed down by repetition and quiet, and Matthew learned that when there were no more headlines to chase, no more statements to issue, no more skeletons left to exhume, silence began to take on a different shape, not the heavy silence of holding back, not the raw silence of a man who had bitten down on his own voice for 50 years, but a silence that was gentle, porous. Something you could live inside without feeling like it would collapse in your chest, and that was a strange thing for a man like him to realize, because he had spent his entire life being defined by the thing he didn't say, the moment he didn't speak, and now that he had spoken, now that it was all out there, he found himself waking each morning with no sense of dread clawing at his throat, no rehearsed arguments curling in his stomach like coiled wire, just the rustle of wind through the trees outside the cabin, the scent of coffee rising from the kitchen, the scratch of a pen against paper as he wrote something down just for himself. He had started journaling again, not like before, not like the desperate notes he'd written on prison napkins and scraps of newspaper during the early days when memory had felt like the only thing they couldn't take from him, but small things, what the clouds looked like, what the birds sounded like, what he dreamed about. Sometimes he dreamed of Henry, not as the man who confessed on national television, not as the golden boy from '69, but as the friend he had once walked beside, the boy with wide eyes and a laugh that came too quickly, and in the dreams they were always young again, always standing at the edge of something enormous, full of belief, untouched by what came after. Other nights he dreamed of Angie, not the courtroom ghost or the voice on the phone or the girl who disappeared into a new name, but as she had been, brilliant, sharp-eyed, a little reckless, someone who deserved to be remembered whole. He wrote those dreams down too. And when he didn't dream, when the nights were just nights, he wrote that, because even the absence of something had weight. He started walking more, not because he needed the exercise, but because he liked the sound of his boots on the trail, liked the feel of the earth holding him up, and sometimes he'd find himself speaking aloud, not to anyone, just testing the shape of words in open air, marveling that they came out without trembling. There was a small town 20 minutes away, just one main street, 3 restaurants, a library, a barber shop, and a bookstore where the woman behind the counter always greeted him with a nod, never asked his name, never asked what he'd done, and once recommended a novel about a soldier who came home from war and planted trees in silence, and he bought it, read it in 2 days, cried at the ending, and went back the next week for another. Slowly he found that life, real life, unremarkable life, began to fill the cracks. He learned the names of birds, bought a pair of binoculars, watched the seasons shift not by the calendar, but by the angle of the light. He fixed the porch railing, taught himself to cook something other than eggs, built a birdhouse. When spring came, a pair of robins moved in, and he checked on them every morning like a ritual. Letters still came, less frequently now, but some. People writing not to dissect the past, but to thank him for showing them they didn't have to be silent either. A man who'd been assaulted by a teacher in 1982. A woman who kept a diary in high school that no one ever read until now. A boy in Kansas who said, "I didn't think men like us could survive. But I think maybe we can." He kept every letter. Still didn't respond. But he read them all. One afternoon, Elena Ward called again. "Just checking in," she said. "You don't know me anything." "Neither do you," he replied. "But here we are. You doing okay?" "Better than I deserve." "I think you deserve peace." "Then maybe I'm finally getting it." They didn't talk long. But it was enough. Some days he wondered what would have happened if he'd spoken in 1969. If he'd walked into the courtroom and said, "It wasn't me." Would the world have believed him? Would Henry have confessed? Would Angie's voice have mattered then? Would he have spent 5 years in prison anyway? Would any of it have changed? Maybe. Maybe not. But he didn't carry those questions like weights anymore. They were just thoughts now, not chains. He didn't walk around imagining different endings. He just walked. One day, he passed a group of kids hiking the trail. They didn't recognize him. Didn't whisper. Just said hello. One of them asked if he'd seen any hawks. He pointed to the ridge. "That way." They waved. Ran off. And he stood there, smiling, long after they were gone. That night, he sat on the porch with a cup of tea, the stars blinking like slow applause above him, and he realized he hadn't thought about Henry once all day. Not once. And that meant something. That meant he wasn't carrying the lie anymore. That he had finally set it down. And in its place, there was only space. Only air. Only silence. And for the first time, it was quiet not because something was missing, but because nothing else needed to be said. Part 12, The Last Letter. It arrived on a Tuesday, tucked among the usual catalogs and bills, nothing marked special or urgent, no return address, just his name written in ink so neat it looked almost mechanical, and at first Matthew didn't think anything of it, let it sit on the table for most of the day while he went about his routines, coffee, walk, pages in his journal, a phone call with Daniel about the local library event coming up, where he'd be speaking about truth and how long it takes to find the shape of it. But later, after dinner, when the sky had gone soft and the house was still, he picked it up, opened the flap, and unfolded the paper slowly, the way you do when your hands remember what your mind hasn't caught up to yet, and the words at the top made his breath stall because they didn't start with a greeting, not even a name, just a sentence, unpunctuated. "I don't know if this will reach you, but I need to say it." And then the next line, and the next, and he read it once, then again, then a third time, and by the end his hands were shaking and something inside him had shifted in a way he hadn't felt since the night Henry had stood at that podium, because the letter wasn't from Henry, and it wasn't from Angie, and it wasn't from Ellie, but from someone he hadn't thought about in years, someone who had disappeared from the margins of his life long before the cameras, before the trial, before the prison walls and the long hollow silences. It was from Clara, his sister, the one person who had stood outside that courthouse in 1969 with her chin up and her fists clenched, who had written him letters every week for the first 6 months he was locked up, then once a month, then not at all, not after the fight they'd had during his first parole hearing when she begged him to tell the truth and he told her it wasn't hers to tell, not after she moved to Seattle and stopped sending birthday cards. Not after he heard from a friend of a friend that she'd married a man who worked in city planning and had 2 kids who didn't know their uncle existed, and the letter, long and heavy, told him why she had gone silent, not because she'd stopped loving him, not because she had stopped believing in him, but because she couldn't live with the weight of watching her brother vanish inside a lie he wouldn't let go of, because every time she looked at him she saw the man who refused to save himself. And it broke her in ways she didn't know how to fix, and now, 50 years later, after the broadcast, after the speeches and the truth and the reckoning, she was writing not to reopen wounds but to close them, writing to say she had watched the documentary, watched the interview, watched the clip where he said, "I'm not a hero. I'm just the end of a lie." And that those words had undone something in her, something small and scared and long hidden, and that for the first time in decades she had wanted to reach for him, not out of duty, not out of guilt, but because he had finally become someone she could see again, someone whose voice had weight not just in the world but in her heart, and she told him about her life. About her daughter who wrote poetry and her son who built tree houses and how her husband had died last year and she hadn't cried, not really, until the night she saw his face on the screen and realized how much time they had lost, how much silence they had let win, and at the end of the letter she wrote, "I don't know if you want this, but I do," and she included her number and said, "No pressure, just love," and signed it the way she used to when she was 17, and he was 19, and they still believed the world could be kind. "Always, Clara." He sat there for a long time. Not crying. Not shaking. Just holding the letter like a compass that had finally stopped spinning. He read it again. Folded it. Stood. Walked to the phone. Dialed. 1 ring. 2. Then her voice, soft and nervous, saying, "Hello?" And he didn't have to say his name, because she already knew, and the silence that came next wasn't the silence of strangers or shame, but the silence of 2 people standing at the threshold of something new, something tender, and he said, "It's me." And she said, "I know." And they talked for an hour, then 2, then agreed to meet, and the next week she came to visit, her hair gray, her smile smaller, but her hug just as fierce, and when she stepped into the cabin she looked around like she was counting the years in the shadows, and then she sat with him, and they drank tea, and they talked about their parents, and about childhood, and about the dog they had once rescued from a ditch and named Lucky, and about all the things they had buried in the ground and in their hearts, and by the end of the night, when she touched his hand and said, "I'm proud of you," it didn't feel like forgiveness or reconciliation or healing, it felt like life, unadorned and unafraid, and he went to bed that night knowing that the story wasn't over, that it would never be over, not really, because stories like his don't end with confessions or credits or final letters, they keep living in the quiet between moments, in the space between voices, in the hands we reach for when we finally stop looking back, and as he drifted off to sleep, his breath slow and steady, he dreamed not of prisons or podiums or lies, but of a table with 2 chairs, a cup of tea, and a letter still warm from being held. Thank you for being with us on The Hidden Truths. If you enjoyed this, leave a like, drop a comment, and be sure to subscribe. The secrets are waiting to be revealed. See you soon.